Shabbat Shalom. Of all of the unexpected bedfellows of biblical verse, perhaps the most surprising is the close proximity between the commandment or mitzvah of loving your neighbor and the obligation to rebuke your kinsman. A small cluster of verses at the heart of what is called the Holiness Code, at the center of the central book of the Bible, the core of our sacred scripture. The text reads as follows: "You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Rebuke your kinsman. Incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord your God." Unanticipated as the juxtaposition may be for us and our rabbinic predecessors, the connection between these two commandments, to love and to rebuke, is not without some logic. Let's begin with the latter, with love. The litmus test for how we interact with others is the golden rule: to treat others as we would ask to be treated. That part is easy. Do unto others as we would want done to ourselves. Far more interesting and a bit more complicated is the first part, the negative commandment. Interestingly, not to hate, but not to hate in one's heart. In other words, to carry a grudge. That is something we are not allowed to do. We're therefore obligated to confront and verbalize the perceived failures and shortcomings of our neighbor or kinsman. To do otherwise, to harbor a hurt, to allow a resentment to fester, is to fall short of our stated self-expectation of doing unto others. To reprove someone according to this logic is an expression of love. To offer rebuke is to say that you care enough about someone that you're insistent on being a stakeholder in that relationship. After all, we say to ourselves, or at least in the abstract, that those who are most invested in us, those who are concerned for our well-being, those who love us, they of all people should be the ones who would tell us if we've stepped out of line. Haters, as a song goes, are going to hate. Lovers, however, Leviticus teaches, will rebuke. More dramatically, the text claims that if we fail to do so, if we keep our complaints to ourselves, then not only have we failed the test of love, but we ourselves become liable. The sin, the guilt, shifts to us. As Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina taught, love without reproof is no love. The juxtaposition of love and rebuke, fidelity and feedback, commitment and criticism is not by happenstance, and they're not in opposition. The two are interdependent, two sides of the same coin, constitutive elements to forming and sustaining relationships of meaning. And yet, we know rebuke stings. All of us intuitively understand that as friends and as colleagues, as congregants and as clergy, we all need to be capable of hearing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. And none of us, I would hope, would ever presume to be perfect. Each one of us is a work in progress. We all have blind spots. We're all capable of self-improvement. And God knows we would all rather have people say what they have to say directly to us than behind our backs. As Oscar Wilde once wrote, "A true friend stabs you in the front." We want to hear it straight. We want the truth. And we know that the litmus test of a strong relationship between individuals or amongst a community is found in our ability to give and receive feedback constructively towards the shared good. In theory, yes, we all know the importance of feedback. In practice, however, our skin is not as thick as we may think it to be. We all know how hard it is to receive criticism. All of which is why we need to be very, very careful and very, very intentional in how we rebuke those we love. This week's Torah reading, as the Rabbi mentioned, Bechukotai, contains what is known as the Tochacha, the verses of rebuke, containing some of the most damning, disproving, and painful passages of our entire biblical tradition. Verse after verse of curses the desolation and destruction that will befall Israel as a result of their misdeeds. It's rough stuff, a brutal reminder by God of the standard expected of Israel and the consequences of falling short of that standard. But if you listen to the Torah reading carefully, then you also know that the tochacha is delivered in a soft undertone. The rabbis understood that this rebuke would be difficult to hear. They knew it would be a bitter pill to swallow, and that if the message was going to be absorbed and internalized, and more importantly acted upon by the listener, it would have to be delivered in a certain way, a manner that could be heard. Rebuke is given, but it's given softly. After all, greater than God's anger, greater than Israel's misstep is God's love. The reproof needs to be heard. The goal is not to tear down, but to build up. Yes, deliver the news. Yes, have the difficult conversations. But whatever must be said carefully, constructively, and with love. It's not easy to give rebuke lovingly. The great sage Rabbi Akiva once wondered aloud if there was a single person in his generation who understood the proper way to deliver rebuke. In his Code of Jewish Law, the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides goes to great lengths to codify the appropriate methods of offering feedback. One should, first and foremost, only ever offer rebuke in private. According to Jewish law, the sin of publicly shaming another person is akin to bloodshed. Maimonides goes on to explain that the person offering criticism must do so gently and tenderly, pointing out that they are doing so in order to better the person and right a relationship back on track. The goal, Maimonides explains, is never to shame or humiliate another. The goal of criticism is always meant to be restorative. There are many reasons why when one rebukes, one must do so with caution and care. But to name the most obvious, you should do so because you could be wrong. Each one of us are, by dint of the limitations of our humanity, only ever aware of our own side of the story. As a dear friend and mentor of mine once taught me, there's a sequencing that must take place when offering rebuke. One must first seek to understand, and only then seek to be understood. Just imagine how much heartache could be avoided in this world if every difficult conversation would begin not with an accusation, but with a stated desire to listen, to return to where we started. Were we to heed the golden rule of doing unto others, it would follow that we should offer rebuke in the manner by which we ourselves would want to receive it, a starting point that undoubtedly involves a presumption of good intent, a starting point anchored in humility, a starting point that entertains the possibility that no single person has a lock on the whole truth. Strange to say, but the first step in offering reproof is to listen. And when we offer rebuke, we need to do so softly because the wise soul understands that our rebuke can say as much about us as it does about the person we're out to critique. The founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, once taught that if one sees an ugliness in another person, before saying anything, we must first meditate on the presence of that same ugliness in ourselves. More often than not, when I'm asked to intervene as a rabbi in a family dispute between parent and child, between siblings, or between spouses, whatever the substance of the dispute may be, the demeanor of the complainants is eerily similar, both too obstinate, both too proud, both too similar to allow for the possibility of seeing the situation from the vantage point of the other. As Thomas Kempnis wrote, "Be not angry that you cannot make others as you wish them to be, since you cannot make yourself as you wish to be." What is your motivation in offering rebuke? Is it pure? Is it sincere? What does it say about you that the person's behavior has irked you so? What nerve of yours is that person tapping into? Before we do a deep dive into the wrongdoings of others, before any of us offer rebuke, our first step must also always be to exhibit a demonstrated willingness to do a deep dive into our own actions. When we offer rebuke, we need to do so softly because our rebuke is meant to restore a relationship, never to tear it apart. Never, ever must things get so personal that a relationship cannot rebound. As my father once told me, there are certain things in this world you just cannot say. You can never tell a cantor, he said, he doesn't have a good voice. You can never tell a rabbi that she is not a scholar. And you can never tell a man that his daughter is ugly. There are certain things from which a relationship simply cannot recover. And those things must never be said. Behaviors, flaws, shortcomings, and missteps, yes, those must be discussed openly and awkwardly. But attacks on character, blanket generalizations, and unsubstantiated accusations of ill will, malice, and otherwise, to those we are invested in, to those with whom we are seeking to see another day, that we cannot do. Threats, ultimatums, red lines, these are all the weapons we brandish for lack of confidence in the substance of our actual complaint. If we must cut, then let us always measure twice, pausing 2 beats, and say only the things that speak to our best selves and our highest hopes. Most of all, when we offer rebuke, we need to do so softly, because our rebuke must be, and must be perceived to be, as coming from a place of love. Ours is an age of hit-and-run public discourse, of verbal pugilism, where political points are scored by uttering the most public, derisive, and scarring comment. Not only does such a climate speak to our baser selves, but on a personal basis, we know it fails to accomplish the very thing we are seeking when we muster the courage to have the conversations with those we love most. We all know that a harsh, ill-delivered rebuke results in either shutting the other person down or causing him or her to come back swinging. I, for one, know that the most impactful, soul-searching, and result-producing criticisms I have received have been those words spoken softly, privately, book-ended with affirmations that though I have disappointed and fallen short, my dialogue partner held the hope and confidence that I could arrive at new heights. When rebuke came with love, that was when my heart opened up. That was when my soul softened, my deeds changed, and I would like to think I found myself becoming the person that I continue to seek to be. To give rebuke is to suggest that someone else could and should be better. At the very least, we should expect of ourselves to be our best selves when delivering. It is said that when the great rabbi of the 19th century, Rabbi Israel Salanter, would critique his community, he would begin by stating, "Don't think that I'm innocent of all the offenses I'm enumerating. I too have committed some of them. All that I am doing is speaking aloud to myself. And if anything you might hear applies to you too also, well and good." When it comes to giving and receiving rebuke, I am well aware that I too am a work in progress, right there with you in seeking to be the person that I aspire to be. Our challenge is a shared one. As I've taught on more than one occasion, from the Garden of Eden onwards, the Torah is a narrative documenting God's frustrations with a humanity that never fails to disappoint. In the Garden of Eden, at the Golden Calf, through the desert wanderings, and right up to the Promised Land, again and again, the children of Israel found themselves on the receiving end of God's rebuke. If God had to work on it, if God had to learn how to give feedback kindly and effectively, how much more so each one of us to those we love most. Let us, nevertheless, redouble our efforts, have the courage to admit our missteps, and show a willingness to regroup for the greater good of each other and the relationships we hold dear. There is no limit to what we can accomplish if we set our minds and hearts to work together on the bright road we share ahead. Shabbat Shalom.